So, good morning. Hopefully, people are seeing us on LinkedIn. Good morning, everyone. We're delighted that you're joining us today. Welcome to Ripples of Change, the podcast where the inner self meets outer transformation. I'm Abby Yano, your host. As an executive coach and organizational consultant, I've spent years honing my ability to lead with awareness and purpose. And I'm excited to explore these ideas with my guests today. Brandon Harding is a wilderness guide, executive coach, and the executive director of Veterans in the Wild. Mike Sweeney is an executive coach and the leader of the Adventure Edge, a 3-day immersive outdoor learning experience. So, as change agents, our impact depends on how we show up, the way we carry ourselves in groups, how we influence others, and how we use our presence can all shape the change we're trying to create. In this podcast, we'll explore these ideas, how we cultivate self-awareness, do the inner work, and intentionally use ourselves as instruments to create the world we want to see. Brandon and Mike are both bringing the power of the outdoors and the wild to facilitating transformation for men and couples. So, Brandon, let me start by asking you, what are you most passionate about in your work?
I think the way that I'll answer that question is like this. Over the past probably 7 or 8 years, I've really seen what being in the wild can do for both the couples that I've taken out and the individual leaders. There's just something unique and special that happens out in the wild that's different than a conference room or a traditional workshop. And so where my passion lies now is getting individuals and couples out into the wild to really help them connect at another level. And so that's what I think about at night. That's what I wake up excited to do, is plan events and create places and experiences for individuals and couples to get out into outdoor spaces and just connect at this really deeper level. So it's pretty much where my brain is sort of at almost all the time, is thinking about how to create those experiences for people.
That's a lovely thing to think about all the time. So, may I ask you, how does that work contribute to the world that you're trying to create, Brandon?
I, so I'll share a couple of quick examples maybe. So when we do these wilderness trips, we have people that come from all different kinds of backgrounds, politically, um, racial, ethnic components, they're all different. And once they get out into the wild, they get to see one another for who they really are. The defenses come down, vulnerability increases exponentially, and people are really present with each other in a way that they're not in other places. And so a real deep connection, an authentic connection happens out into the wild. And then those connections take place after they leave. Then they find themselves better able to relate and connect with humanity. And so I think, it's what we're creating in the wild is this little bubble of people that come out. They're very different in lots of different ways, but while they're out there, they recognize their humanity and that we really are the same in so many ways. And then they're able to go back out into the world, so to speak, and take those principles back out into their communities. And so it's sort of like the hope, I guess, is that as they learn this skill of how to interact with one another in the wild, they'll be able to take that and apply that out and back into their regular life and really increase, hopefully the ability to connect and reduce those divisions, especially now that we're seeing in our
Yeah.
culture. I mean, we're so divided.
hmm if I were to choose a headline, it would be something about connecting to our authentic selves and to our humanity, right? So
Yeah,
we can
absolutely.
connect with others. Lovely. Mike, I'm going to ask you the same question. What are you most passionate about in your work?
These days, I'm very passionate about discovery. I'm rediscovering an old relationship with a friend of mine, and we're doing this together. This is a friend from 30 years ago. Discovering a bit how the power of the outdoors can really change things. And that's sort of been a kernel over the last 5 years or so. And I'm playing with that more and more, speaking with people like Brandon and others who are maybe further along. So that's making me passionate that it's all new. and it feels like kind of Lewis and Clark a little bit. I'm also really passionate about finding more depth. I have noticed that when I walk with clients, they say things to the trail that are deeper than they've ever said on Zoom.
Mm.
And if you think about the energy of forwarding and deepening, I'm very much a forward person and always have been. I'm finding that the deeper the insights the client has, the easier the forward part is. So it's kind of less work if we get deep enough. So I'm finding that the outdoors opens up a level of depth that sometimes I haven't been able to find on a technological connection. And then finally, I read somewhere once that a duo is the strongest or the smallest atomic unit of a team. And I really like that concept. So as I move from one-on-one coaching to dyadic or trio coaching into high-performing team coaching, it's really interesting to see, to Brandon's point, how those connections form across the different group or team that you have. So thinking about how to increase the connection and depth between those duos to allow them to have relationships after an experience, those are the things that are bringing out the most passion these days.
Lovely. Well, I have heard a lot of talk about depth and deepening connection, deepening relationships, and also the sense of discovery, which is very fun. How does the work that you do contribute to the world you're trying to create, Mike?
The world I am headed towards and trying to create is leaders operating with a sense of agency, courage, and freedom. And I think what agency means having the ability to choose. I think with courage, that means we have the ability to be vulnerable. And freedom is certainly connected to the outdoors because there's an expansiveness that comes with being small in a big place. And I did a TED Talk recently that was about paradox theory and polarity management. So I spend a lot of time working with the clients on mastering the space between opposites. So work or life, accountability or empathy, environment or economy. Those are the sort of things that I think in our society we're losing the ability to play in the middle space and have conversations that are deep enough and connected enough to actually make some progress.
Mm-hmm. So again, there's a headline there of agency, courage, and freedom. Lovely.
I think that's fair. Yeah, that's where I love to head in the direction of those three things.
So it's funny that you mentioned agency because my next question is, and I'll start with you, Mike, seeing as you said it. When and where did you learn your agency? In other words, your sense of yourself, the sense of yourself as someone who can make change in the world.
Where I felt like I learned agency, if I can think back to a specific moment, it actually happened in the outdoors. And I was hiking with two people. We were in the Waimanchi Wilderness, which is in Colorado. And two of us were in fantastic shape. We were in the Army at the time. And the third had been, gone to business school and moved to a certain area. If he's listening, you're in great shape now, buddy. So, but at the time, not as much. We were at altitude. And we were hiking in the woods. And after the first day, it was clear that he was not going to be able to keep up. And we were pushing the pace pretty hard. And I found myself challenging him in very much a kind of ranking sort of way. Like, do you want me to carry your pack for you? Like, do you want us to go slower? Do you need another break? A lot of sarcasm in there. And I remember that night we were camping. He was not in a good mood after all those barbs. And so he was sleeping. I think it was either the first or second night. And I remember hearing this labored breathing. And I went over and kind of put my hand on his wrist to feel his pulse. I think it was something like 150 as asleep. And it was actually dangerous. He was getting to the point where he was having some altitude sickness. It really wasn't him. It was kind of the altitude and the conditions. And I remember waking up that morning really angry that I couldn't keep doing this hike. And I had just a brief moment where like a breeze blew by me and I thought, God, how horrible must this be for him? He's out here with his friends. He's not feeling well. And one of his best friends in the world is really going after him. And I felt like that was a moment of choice where I can choose to continue to grind my way through this hike and enjoy it. Or I can realize that the point was to connect, to link with my friend, give up on the hike, go back down to a lower altitude and find a few things to do that we could enjoy together and deepen the relationship. I think that was the moment where I realized that I could make the change. And then also that had a huge impact on him, his enjoyment, and the depth of our relationship over time. So I think that was the moment kind of on that hike, realizing that I didn't have to really grind it all the time.
That's such a powerful story, Mike.
The interesting part is the other one kept hiking on his own. But I do remember, I'll put just the cherry on the top of that story. So maybe a year or so later, we were skiing, and we were with my parents, and we were, this is really, for me, that was the moment I understood the power of empathy and putting myself in someone else's shoes. But we're skiing, and he was complaining about his boot, and his pinky toe was really injured. And he's like, oh, my pinky toe, and it feels like this. And I remember my mother leaning over, and she said, hey, maybe we should amputate, like as a joke. And he looked me in the eyes and said, now I understand you fully. So the moment of sometimes realizing that maybe the joke or the nudge or the cutting remark isn't what somebody needs when they're hurting.
Mm-hmm. What I find interesting about the first part of your story is sometimes there's a little voice that we don't always listen. It's there, but we don't always listen to it until something triggers us to actually notice that there's a voice there speaking to us. The voice of empathy, often like, oh my God, I can't imagine what this person's going through.
Mm.
So it's that hearing that voice. So Brandon, same question to you, which is when and where did you learn your agency?
I don't know that I had like this really central story where it really came to light, like Mike shared, which was really powerful. I think for me, it was sort of probably in my first tour as a chaplain in the Navy. I was serving with a Navy CV battalion, and it was during our initial deployment into Iraq. And I think just over the course of that deployment, just working with individuals that were struggling with a variety of things in a very austere environment, just began to see that I was able to help people and help them get to a better place in their lives as we were working through sometimes some really difficult challenges in a combat environment. And then I think it just grew from there. When I first started doing wilderness events back in 2004, it was there, just seeing like the way that we structured things and the way that we put things together, it had a real impact in people's lives. And so it wasn't, I can't think of like a clear story where it was like, aha, I have this ability to do this. It just sort of grew over time of seeing, especially like taking people into the wild and creating a structure where they could experience the wild in a different way. I think that's where it just sort of grew out of that.
Yeah, right. And sometimes, I mean, it is gradual. We don't all have this this moment of epiphany where we realize it, but rather, as you were describing, that there's some gradual awareness over time that I am having an impact, that I can actually help people, right?
Yeah. And I think where it really sort of hit home was I went on an outward bound trip. It was about 15 years ago, and it was fantastic. Like great experience. It was all veterans. It was folks who'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Most of them were still on active duty, as I was still on active duty. And it was just this great opportunity to be out in the wild. And then given my background of having been a chaplain and led lots of retreats and groups and stuff like that, there was an element of that was missing that I felt like it could have really enhanced the experience. And so later on, when we, with myself and a few other folks, developed the first sort of wilderness experience for Marines in North Carolina, we added those other elements, and that's where we saw the real big change come into play. And so I think it was some of those initial events in North Carolina with the Marine Corps where it really began to hit home, like, okay, we've created something that is special, that has a real impact in people's lives.
Lovely. So as we talk about ourselves as being an instrument of change, how we use our presence, our self-awareness, and our insights to create a future outcome, I would like to ask you, how do you use yourself as an instrument to create the world you're trying to create? And Brandon, why don't I continue with you?
So repeat the question one more time. I want to make sure I
So
understand it.
how do you use yourself as an instrument? As an instrument of change, when we are aware of our presence, our impact, how we come across to people, our self-awareness. How do you use that awareness to create the world you're trying to create?
Yeah, I think for me, it sort of starts at the very beginning of these trips that we do. Um, I try to model the sort of empathy and vulnerability that we want others to experience while they're out there. So it's sort of trying to create the container or the culture of the experience. And if I model it well, it tends to, go better. If I'm able to be aware of like what's happening in me internally, like, the thoughts I'm having,
Right.
the emotions that I might be experiencing. And then if I can be clear about what I'm experiencing and model that level of sort of vulnerability, and then I'm going to trust the group as I, might share something or disclose something. And then just sort of the way of interacting with the group, always, doing my best to be kind and generous and, empathetic, that then it sort of just sows those seeds within the group, and then it tends to go really, really well. And if I don't do that, if I'm less effective in that, then, it usually I recover, but I can see how it doesn't have the kind of impact that I want to have while we're out in the wild.
Right. Mike?
I mean, those are fantastic things. The two I would definitely agree with is sometimes going first and modeling the vulnerability, and also being really observant of what's happening inside. I struggle sometimes with designing experiences that I like, and designing experiences that are going to be effective for everyone. So I mentioned before, like, I'm typically a default forward person. So there's usually an outcome, like, what's your intention for this? And are we moving in that direction? Whereas some people like discovery and expansiveness. So I try to use myself, but also recognize that there's an opposite, like a paired set to that. So if I like structure, there's going to be somebody that likes space. So building in opportunities for both. I know that I've gotten a lot of feedback that I can come off as intimidating. Like, maybe I'll look buttoned up, or I look serious, or I'll have like a resting, angry face or something. So I try to be playful. I mean, I've talked about this before with people that I often take a shoe off when I'm coaching, just so I can feel funny and be a little playful. So on the hike, sometimes let the silly side show up, let some humor come out. I do tend to bring a lot of energy. So I like to have moments where we can let some steam out, and we can be loud, because in the wild, you don't necessarily have to be quiet. You want to be respectful, but like, you've all seen the discussions in Dead Poet Society of the barbaric yawp. Like, we can get some volume going. And really paying attention to Brandon's point about what's happening in me and then what's happening in the group, really heightening all of the senses, so I can observe what's happening in the dyads, what's happening in the group as a whole, what's happening in me, and surfacing some of that at the right time to facilitate shifts when they need to happen, or different pairings when they need to happen. Long answer to say there's a lot of different parts of ourselves. So using myself, but then also realizing there's an opposite that exists that might not want the same thing I want.
Right. So you mentioned earlier the polarity of going forward and going deeper, and you're very aware of that the polarity and the tension between them. And I'm just wondering, it just occurs to me that what might appear intimidating is the going forward piece, sort of the drive of going forward. Does that resonate for you?
Absolutely. And there's a couple levels to it. So the idea of getting outcomes is very achievement focused, right?
Yeah.
So thinking about I remember reading in Flourish some of Seligman's work around the frame of PERMA, right? Positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. And for most of my life, I was a very heavy A dominant sort of person. Like, what is the objective? Where are we moving? If you think about, I started my career as an armored cavalry officer. The number one word that people think about when you hear cavalry is charge. So I have a lot of that forward energy, charge energy in me. And that can come out hot. I do think I'm a relatively sensitive soul who has some depth, but it doesn't happen for everyone. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work. And I think that men after a certain age, at least I'll speak for myself personally, it's difficult making friends with depth. I have maybe one or two from each era. And so some of these trips are a proxy for having a group of people that like to do the things that I like to do. And I feel like some friendships grow from the intimacy that comes from a multi-day experience with people who have similar interests. A little bit of shared trauma with the toil of the hike, some shared aspirations, some shared laughter. And I think that I've recognized that forward energy needs to be counterbalanced, right? It's like breathing in and breathing out. Like, you can't just do one of them. We need both to move forward in a way that I think is balanced and healthy. But I am aware of that heavy forward energy. Like, if there's a point in a room where we're 5 minutes left to go and we're not talking about action items, I notice some things that come up for me.
Right. Brenda, is there anything that you heard from Mike that you would like to respond to or just react to?
No, yes, the part that he shared about laughter and being, having a little bit of mirth in the interactions, I think that is another great tool to sort of deepen the connection between folks. And one of the questions that we'll ask in one night around the fire, because a lot of times we'll have these fireside discussions at night, and they're fairly deep. We're getting people to respond to some very evocative kind of stuff that tends to go kind of deep for them. And so we'll mix that in with a question on one of the nights that'll be like, share an embarrassing story from your life. And as people like tap into that embarrassment and are willing to disclose something with the group, one, there is a tremendous amount of laughter. I mean, people are like just busting up, dying, laughing as they hear these stories that people share. But out of that, there's another level of connection that happens through laughter. There's some great research that shows that one of the best ways people connect is through laughter. So it's like the combination of lots of things. It's like Mike said, it's like the hardship of the hike or the physical activity, what we call the type 2 fun. That fun that, it's not really fun in the moment. It's, going up this really steep section of a hike with a heavy pack and you're like, this is terrible. Why am I doing this? And then you get to the top and you see the vista and you get that sense of awe and you're like, wow, this is amazing. So it's that type 2 fun mixed in, that arduousness of the hike or whatever adventure you're doing. And then, I think it is great to have that levity built into the group. One of the groups that I did over the summer with the Naval Academy, that was one of the hallmarks of this group, was just the amount of laughter that happened on that trip. There was just so much great levity that came into this experience with them, and it really heightened their sense of connection.
Sorry, there was just something that sounded like a truck. Was that in one of your?
That was a motorcycle at full volume right outside my window.
All right, got it.
You use two words that I think are really powerful: mirth and levity. And I have this theory that they say that mirth is the emotion created in the moment of laughter, like that delightful reconciliation of some violation that, oh, now I get the joke. I have a theory that mirth the aha moment from learning and the awe moment when you see a big vista are the same sort of like joyful glimmer that we have. And I love that you brought up mirth and the humor. And I think that shared humor, especially around embarrassment or shame, I love that. I haven't asked that question, but I immediately thought of something that would be a really good one that I'm going to use for the next hike. So thanks for sharing that, Brandon.
Yeah, you're welcome. The stories often end up with some element of a bathroom trauma of some kind.
Why is it always that way?
Brandon, your story resonated with me because in high school, I went to a high school where we went hiking all the time. And this was in another country, and I came from the US, and I couldn't understand, why are you all going hiking? This is uncomfortable. This isn't fun. It's hard. I'm not liking this. I'm not enjoying this. And then gradually I came to absolutely love hiking, to love the experience and feeling a deep bonding with my classmates.
Yeah, it's the type 2 fun. There's a book called The Comfort Crisis. If you haven't read it, it should definitely be on your list. But the author just highlights all the important parts of getting outside of our comfortable life, especially in the United States, where every day our house is set to 72. We walk out to our car and jump in the AC, and we've got plenty of food, most of us, in our refrigerators. There's so many things that are comfortable, and learning to be uncomfortable is so good for your soul. So that's the type 2 fun is definitely an element that I think that creates the bonding. You think back, Mike and I are both military guys. I mean, I went to boot camp back when I was 17 years old, so many days ago. And in the military, there is always a physical component to the group dynamics and training. And it's because it does connect people. And so I'm not trying to make the experiences I do, like boot camp or going to ranger school or any of those kinds of things. We're not trying to break someone or really test them in a way that sometimes the military training does. But we do want it to be challenging. We do want it to be hard enough that they do have to sort of reach a little bit and push through a little bit in order to get the most out of the experience.
I would sort of borrow what you said and actually say we also need to get outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
Because we're often focused here, right?
Yeah, and get outside of not only ourselves, but our heads.
Yeah.
I think there's something that it's, I'd say 9 times out of 10, if I ask someone, a coaching client who is very intellectual, a question, I'll say, well, maybe where do you feel that in your body? The next 2 words are, I think, and I'm like, all right. when I'm outside, what does it feel like to be big is a very different conversation than in the box of a Zoom or even kind of at a coffee shop. So it almost is like a cheat code to allowing a little bit more expansiveness and embodiment when there's a sweat going, when there's a toil going, and when you're looking at an amazing vista. It's kind of hard not to get beyond the head.
Yeah, we do a 1-word check-in practice after like big hikes and things that we'll do. So as everybody's standing in a circle, usually still with their pack on, and we'll have them do a couple of like really deep breaths, just like kind of like a, almost like a yoga type cleansing breath. And then the question will be, what are you experiencing in your body right now? And then share 1 word that describes what you're experiencing. So it really helps them get in tune with what's going on internally when we're on these hikes.
Right.
I think for most of my life, I would have answered, there's a body.
Right. Is there any question that you would ask each other?
I'm really impressed and amazed at the theme of humanity. And I've listened to a podcast that you've been on, Brandon, and kind of blew me away. So maybe how do you bring humanity to the groups that you lead?
That's a great question. I think it sort of starts from the very, very beginning of how we set it up. Like a lot of times when these groups first started, it was mostly military, active duty. And and so one of the rules right up front was you could not refer to your rank or your position in the military
Mm.
on the event. You were Bob or Ted or Susan or Sally or whatever. And we always start off in a circle, just to kind of level everybody out. Like we're standing in a circle. There's no hierarchy. There's nobody there that sort of outranks or is in a different leadership position. The guides were kind of leaders in a sense, but one of the people who came on a retreat with us a couple summers ago, he said the coolest thing that I liked about this was we were we were being led without, I can't phrase it how he said it, but it was sort of like he was saying we were being guided without, this really strong push. We sort of let it evolve.
Mm.
So that's, I think, one element. And then we've collated some questions there. We call them the connecting questions that they start from right from the beginning. So as we're driving out to the trailhead, these are, in some ways kind of classic coaching questions as well. But what they do is they start the group off sharing and talking about important things in their life. And many folks have commented, at the end of the event, they've said, yeah, when we drove out to the trailhead and we were talking about the things that we were talking about, they were like, I knew this was this was going to get real. We were going to get real with each other. And so I think that's part of it, is just creating the culture or the container that says, hey, we're going to be real with each other. We're going to be vulnerable. We're going to be intimate, because that's how we build trust. High performing teams, the lubricant that makes them high performing is vulnerability,
Mm.
or trust and vulnerability. Those two things go together to really create that dynamic. And so that's a part of what we're trying to do. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
It
that's
does. It does. I mean, the tactics that you have around building that sense of vulnerability and humanity, especially with the rank, that's a big deal.
Right.
Like, especially for people who have served. So thanks for sharing.
Mhm. I was just, go ahead.
no go. Yeah.
Um, I was thinking that for me, a metric of a successful design is exactly what you said. When the group feels like they led it themselves,
Yeah.
we're there in the background, and we allow that kind of that their experience to emerge. They don't know that we've created the experience or that we're sort of guiding from behind, but it's successful when they have a sense that they led it themselves, right?
I feel like it's the difference between making it happen and letting it happen.
Mm.
Right? Like creating the container for the good stuff to happen using the power of the outdoors without necessarily kind of grinding through an agenda.
Right.
And that can be, how much structure and how much space is kind of open for group discussion and redesign.
Yeah, nice. Brandon, is there anything that's come up that you'd like to ask Mike?
Yeah. I think I'm curious. I've heard a little bit about this, but I'm remain curious of when it sort of you noticed, Mike, that okay, coaching is different in the wild, and this is where I want to shift my emphasis towards.
Yeah. When I noticed, there's a couple different points along the way. I think, when did I notice it was different, and when did I notice that there was something maybe that other people could get value from? I'll kind of go to one moment when I reconnected with the friend who I'm doing this work with now. He had just left the military, financially set, and had one of those I am jobs. I am a soldier. I am a doctor. I am a lawyer, versus I do this work, or I work in this place, or I consult with these people. So that's an identity job. And as he was redefining what he wanted in the next chapter, he was a little lost with it. I mean, he was totally fine and secure and happy, and temperature set at 72, but kind of didn't know what was next and what was emerging. And so he invited me out to ski, and we got on the chairlift, and we were skiing a little bit. Had a sense of toil. We're in the sunshine. We're outdoors, and I was doing just what you said, some standard coaching questions like, what do you feel like it's time for? Who are you now? Who are you becoming? What's important about that? Just standard coaching questions, but they were episodic and they built on each other. So like each chairlift ride became a little bit more reflection. And I might ask a question, he would talk, and then would ski down and get to the end. And we did this for a week, sometimes skiing, laughing and, up to thighs in powder, other times, running into a tree. And we were rediscovering ourselves after 30 years or so, but also rediscovering what he wanted and what he longed for in the future. And at the end of the week, he said, wow, that was really, really powerful. And I kind of said with a grin, well, this is what I do. It wasn't the most humble thing to say, but he laughed a little bit, and he had done a ton of leadership development and a ton of outdoor work before. And we just started talking about, how could we invite other people into that powerful experience? And what is the combination of the outdoors and movement and coaching? And I went out the next year and we skied with another friend, and that became interesting because there were 3 of us, and there were, sometimes you'd ride with one and sometimes with the other. And really it was that ski trip, and with a dear friend who was willing to be open and willing to get and answer some of the deep questions about what was coming up in the next part of his life. And that for me, I said, I could ski, I could be with great people, I could learn a lot about myself and about other people, and we could all help each other. It just felt like something I wanted to do more of and help more people experience. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Great question. Gentlemen, I'm thinking that maybe we put a bow on this here. What do you think?
Sure.
I feel good about it. I mean, I hope that we continue conversations down the road, but for this one, I feel nice and complete.
Brandon, you feel complete?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you.
Absolutely. So we've come full circle because, Mike, you came back to the sense of discovery, which you started with, and the sense of rediscovering ourselves, rediscovering connection, rediscovering what's possible. And what's possible from Brandon's framing of humanity and connection, and sort of rediscovering that with other people. This has been such a rich conversation. Thank you both so much for sharing so openly with me and with our audience.
Thanks so much for having us, Debbie.
Absolutely. And then we'll talk about continuing the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
All right. See you all. Bye-bye.